How's it going, Marvel Snappers? I'm back from my short vacation to the water park with the family, and I am ready to get back to snapping. I played a few games on my mobile while I was away, but I definitely was not nearly as plugged in to the metagame and the format that's going on, especially after those recent over-there updates, as I typically am when I'm streaming full-time. Before I go live later today for my typical Monday through Friday live stream at twitch.tv/Jeff Hoagland, I wanted to go ahead and cruise through some of the data on untapped.gg to see what's doing well with the latest Marvel Stat metagame developments. I thought maybe it could be fun to put together a video of me doing that. This is the first time I've done this type of video on the channel, so I would love feedback in the comments down below if this is the type of thing that you enjoy. My plan is to take a peek at the 5 most popular decks at rank 70 through 99, which tend to be the most competitive bracket on the Marvel Snap ladder, in my opinion. And I'm also going to highlight some other less popular decks that appear to be doing well or have something noteworthy to mention after the recent over-the-air updates. And I'm also going to poke around looking for decks that feature some Ghost Spider, since that was recently released last week, as well as other things I'm interested in playing. Let's go ahead and jump on into it, shall we? Starting with this lovely Galactus deck, everyone's favorite, including my own. Galactus. Spider-Man was changed the most recent over-there update, and honestly, it was arguably made better in the Galactus deck. The Galactus deck was typically playing Spider-Man on turn 5 after you waved out a turn 4 Galactus, and you generally speaking weren't playing anything alongside that 4 energy Spider-Man, so you're happy to pay 1 more energy for it and get 1 more point of power out of this webbed menace. It is worth noting that it is heavily implied by a Marvel Snap dev that Galactus will be seeing an adjustment in the patch that we are expecting tomorrow on Tuesday, but as of right now, Galactus remains the most popular deck, as it has been for the last month plus in these ranks 70 through 99. It's a deck that you're either going to want to be playing or have a plan to be playing against. Speaking of having a plan against Galactus, I think Galactus being the most popular deck right now is one of the many reasons why this particular control deck is the second most popular deck in the format. Spider-Man of your own, Professor X, Storm, all of these cards that restrict where your opponent is able to play out to are cards that give you meaningful counterplay in the Galactus matchup. That being said, I do think this is the archetype that the Spider-Man nerf specifically was targeting. While this deck previously wanted to wait till turn 5 to play Spider-Man typically anyways, playing Spider-Man on turn 5 for the full 5 energy in this deck means that your Cyclops isn't triggering, it means your Hulk's not getting bigger from the High Evolutionary bonus, it means your Sunspot's not picking up an extra point of energy. That 1 extra cost on the Spider-Man is a big deal for this archetype. That being said, all of these games you see recorded here are after the most recent over-there update, so you can see that this archetype is still performing very well. Again, I would wager in large part due to the fact that it has all the tools you want to be playing to be competitive into Galactus. Looking at the third most popular deck per untapped.gg stats here, we have an old favorite getting revived a little bit by High Evolutionary in Lockjaw. Wasp, on reveal from High Evolutionary, gives 2 different things in her path, -1 attack each. This means not only is she a free thing to play into your Lockjaw path, but she effectively leaves behind 2 points of power when you play her out into your deck. Hulk gets extra massive from the ongoing bonus that High Evolutionary provides. It was also noteworthy that that ongoing bonus is available inside of your hand, meaning if this Hulk gets discarded to something like Dracula, you're going to keep that ongoing bonus. Dr. Doom alongside Odin give this deck the nice ability to have counterplay to things like Spider-Man as well as Storm, meaning that this deck's probably pretty reasonable into the control deck that we just looked at that was the second most popular deck in the format. That being said, this deck doesn't really have any counterplay to Galactus specifically, so I would wager it probably struggles a little bit into the most popular deck, but I think that also makes this a good candidate to keep in the back of your mind if Galactus does get adjusted tomorrow, as many of us are expecting to happen. Looking at the fourth most popular set of decks on untapped.gg, we have yet another High Evolutionary shell. This particular grouping of decks is noteworthy that they are all largely Abomination decks. Abomination, when it gets evolved with High Evolutionary, gets 1 cheaper for each afflicted power modifier you have on your opponent's card on the board, so it can effectively be a 0 energy 9 power play if you've taken power off of 5 different things that they've played out. Because this afflict mechanic is important for these variations, Cyclops, Thing, and Wasp are mainstays inside of a lot of the decks in this grouping. It is noteworthy that this particular deck list that's highlighted as the most popular in this group does feature the card Hazmat to give everything on the board -1, but as a whole, Hazmat's only contained in about 25% of the decks in this grouping. I think this particular group of decks is probably the least defined of all the decks that we're looking at here today, but I wanted to call it out because it does have pretty potent stats per the metrics here that we're looking at. The fifth most popular deck per the Untapped metrics, and the only one that they classify as A tier based on average cube games, is Sera Control. I think this archetype is what I would classify as a pub stomper in a card game, meaning that I think this deck actually struggles a bit into both Galactus and the Control deck that preys on Galactus, but this deck is just so good against basically everything else in the format that I think you can struggle a bit against the two top dogs and still be an incredibly strong deck overall if you're making it up in other places. I also think this deck's large average cube games that make it that only A tier deck on Untapped.gg are largely related to the fact that people often just hate retreating games where they get blown out by a tech card, and this deck is playing Killmonger, Shang-Chi, and Enchantress, sometimes 2 of those on the final turn of the game that generate absolutely massive blowouts, leading to a lot of 4 and even 8 cube game wins, making this deck a good deck for climbing overall. Moving along to less popular things I wanted to dig into a little bit. My favorite archetype got an adjustment on Thursday, and that was the bounce deck. Beast was changed from a 2/2 to a 3/4, and I genuinely felt like this change could go either way. While a 3/4 Beast is definitely better in a number of situations than a 2/2 was in terms of the amount of power it puts onto the board, it also demands a little bit more specific sequencing and makes the archetype with Kitty Pryde a little bit worse, since you can't Beast your Kitty Pryde back until turn 4 now, when you could previously do it on the 3rd turn of the game. That being said, as the numbers rack up on Untapped.gg, it looks like the stock bounce deck that I was enjoying previously, these 12 cards with no changes, is still putting up a very good average cube and win rate in this 70 to 99 bracket that I think is incredibly competitive. Scrolling through other decks featuring Beast on Untapped.gg, I came across this deck list that's card for card the Darkhawk Sentry variation that I posted a highlight with at the end of last week. I think this is actually a deck that's potentially a little bit better with a 3/4 Beast compared to the 2/2, just because you don't have nearly as high a density of things to play out that are cheap, so you are typically playing Beast on turn 3 on its own anyways in a lot of the games, and now we're getting more stats for doing exactly that. This archetype also got Hood as a bit of an upgrade, essentially at -3 power, donated across the board with Viper. Obviously, this deck has a little bit less impressive stats than the bounce deck, but it's also, I think, a little bit less volatile, and it's just more interactive, which is a more fun strategy for a lot of people to play on occasion. I will say, with Beast going up to 3 cost in this build, I do want to experiment with maybe swapping Debris for something else to bring the curve of the deck down. Something like Iceman, or perhaps even the freshly buffed Medusa, could be a prime candidate for testing out in this archetype, I think. The third Beast deck here actually bridges the gap into the other card I wanted to look at deck lists for, and that is Ghost Spider Variations, our newest season pass card. This bounce variation, for those that aren't super familiar, cuts the Collector, Hitmonkey, Bishop stat stick package to essentially replace them with this movement sub package of Human Torch and Vulture as payoff, and Iron Fist and Ghost Spider as enablers, and we can pick these cards back up with things like Falcon and Beast and redeploy them to get their bonuses again and again. The metrics here compared to the traditional bounce archetype line up with my personal experience in that this deck is probably a little bit worse than the established Hitmonkey bounce deck, although it can still be competitive if you enjoy the movement mechanics. I think the one place this deck really struggles in comparison to the stock bounce deck, as I would refer to it as, with Hitmonkey, is that the movement aspect of this gives you a little bit more location variance than you'd otherwise care for. They make it so you like have to play Angela in the center or the right path to get the most value out of her. It means there's something that like miniaturized lab flips up. It can completely mess up what you have going on and make your cards feel a lot worse than they otherwise could. So while I think this variation is novel, the stats as well as my experience would indicate that if you're looking to just play the best bounce deck, the Hitmonkey Collector Bishop variation is definitely still superior. Looking into other Ghost Spider deck lists, these 12 cards in front of you now are the best performing per the metrics on untap.gg so far. I don't think that's a coincidence in the current format. Storm and Juggernaut most notably give this movement-based deck counterplay into Galactus, something you really need to have a plan for. And I will say I like overall the really low curve that this deck is bringing to the table. I presume when you're playing with this deck, you want to prioritize typically playing Storm and either the center or the left side pass. That way you can Iron Fist extra things into that location after the fact should your opponent be deploying to the board. I also like the fact that there's Kitty Pryde in here because all of these movement cards work well with Angela, and then Kitty Pryde works well with Angela as well. And then this deck is top ending a copy of Gamora, who I would wager is typically played on the 6th turn of the game alongside with Kitty Pryde under ideal circumstances and what this deck is looking to do. The other variation of Ghost Spider deck putting up some reasonable metrics here are ones that are looking to play Wave on 5 as a tech card against things like Bounce and Sera. Essentially, these decks are looking to set up Wave as well as a 2-energy play like Ghost Spider, or in this deck's case, Star-Lord for our example list on that 5th turn of the game. And then you slam either Gamora or something like Doctor Doom in that final moment, making it difficult for your opponent to keep up with. Against decks where you're not interested in waving on turn 5, a deck like this one can also deploy multiple things on that final turn of the game to add a lot of stats. For example, this deck list could play Vulture, Ghost Spider, and Miles Morales as a 1-energy play, or you could play Maximus, Miles, and Star-Lord, making a potent build-your-own 6-energy play that can swing the game in a big way. Anywho, I'm going to be firing up for our Marvel Snap live stream here shortly at twitch.tv/Jeff Hoagland. I'd love if you drop on by. You can always find me there Monday through Friday, streaming from about 10 a.m. Central till about 3 or 4 p.m. Central during the week. This type of very data-driven look at the Marvel Snap metagame based on the untapped metrics is something that I haven't done here on the channel before, and you made it all the way through to the end, so I would love to hear your feedback on it in the comments if this is something that you enjoyed and I should consider doing again in the future. As always, if you enjoyed my musings on this topic, snap that like button and be sure to check back in again tomorrow, and hopefully we'll have some tasty patch notes about how, however, Galactus is going to be changed.